It was supposed to be a regular Sunday dinner. The roast was still giving off steam. The glasses were a little more than half full. The kind of scene you see folks posting on social media to show off their perfect family. That's when she said it. My daughter-in-law, Charlotte. Her voice was sharp, like it could cut right through bone. "You're just a moocher here," she said. The word didn't even bounce around the room. It just landed, heavy and final. My fork clattered against the plate. Across the table, my only kid, my son Brandon, didn't even twitch. He didn't say a word to stick up for me. Didn't tell her she was out of line. He just stared down into his wine glass, swirling the red stuff around like it could somehow make the whole moment disappear. I kept my mouth shut, not because I was scared, but because in times like that, quiet carries a lot more weight than yelling ever could. They figured my silence meant I was giving in. They thought I'd keep taking every slap in the face, just like I had for the past several years of cold shoulders, whispered comments, and locked doors in my own home. But they were way off, and they're gonna pay for thinking my quietness meant I was weak. The room fell into that awkward quiet, where every little sound feels like a betrayal. The scrape of a knife on the plate, the low hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock on the wall, counting out seconds that felt like a jury's verdict. I could feel a slow, steady thumping in my head. But on the outside, I was a stone statue. My face didn't give anything away, like I hadn't heard a single thing. Charlotte squirmed in her seat with a smug little grin, the kind a person wears when they know they've hit you where it hurts most. My son, Brandon, finally looked up and met my eyes for a flash. There was no sorry in there. No embarrassment, just the empty look of a guy who's too worn out or too chicken to stand up for his old man. That look hit me harder than anything Charlotte said. I gently put my fork down, the little clink echoing. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and steady. Nobody moved as I pushed my chair back. I walked out to the porch. The night air was cooler than I expected, smelling a little like rain and freshly mowed grass. The crickets were starting up their nightly concert, not caring one bit about the crack that had just split wide open in that dining room. Out there, in the peace and quiet, I pulled out the old silver pocket watch from my vest. The thing was covered in scratches, worn down from decades of use, but it was still ticking as true as ever. My dad gave it to me back when I turned 20. Told me, "Keep time, but don't let time keep you." I'd carried it through my time in the armed services, through those late nights at jobs I hated, through all the sacrifices I made for 30 years just to make sure my family had a place to live. And now here I was, standing on the very porch of a house I built with my own 2 hands and every penny I had, being called a moocher in it. I thought back to when Brandon first brought Charlotte home. She seemed so sweet back then, or at least that's what I thought. Bright eyes, polite words, always quick to help with the dishes. I remember thinking to myself, "He's a lucky guy. She's gonna take good care of him." But the tiny cracks start to show pretty fast if you know what to look for. She started making little remarks when she thought I couldn't hear. About the old lazy boy chair in the living room. About me watching the television news too loud. About how the utility bill shot up since I moved in. Each word wasn't a big deal on its own, but put him all together and they made a noose. And Brandon, my boy, he was brought up to be better than that, brought up to respect his elders, to honor what people do for you. But somewhere along the line, maybe when he started moving up the ladder at his job, when Charlotte's hold on him got stronger, he started drifting away. He still called me Dad, still asked me to carve the Thanksgiving turkey. But his eyes would wander off when I spoke, and his quiet moments got longer every year. I leaned against the porch railing, listening to the muffled sound of laughter from inside. They didn't even wait for me. They just kept on eating like I was nothing more than an empty chair. For a second, I felt that sharp sting of tears welling up. Not for myself, though. For the boy I raised. The kid who used to hang onto my leg when he was scared of thunder, who used to sneak little notes into my lunchbox that said, "I love you, Dad." That boy was gone, swapped out for a man who sat there in silence while his wife tore me apart with her words. I snapped the pocket watch shut. My patience had hit the end of the line. When I stepped back inside, nobody looked up. Charlotte was giggling at something on her phone, and Brandon was chewing slowly, lost in his own head. I walked right past them, past the dining room, and down the hall to my study. The smell of paper, ink, and old leather felt like a hug. I sat down at the wooden desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in over a decade. The deeds, the bank statements, the contracts, every single one of them had my name on it. They all proved I was a long way from the moocher she made me out to be. I ran a hand over the documents, my fingers tracing the raised seals. My brain started turning, slow and steady like an old motor starting back up. Charlotte and Brandon thought they had the upper hand. They thought I was just a ghost in their house, put up with out of a sense of duty. But the real story was different. The truth was, the power was still sitting right there in my hands, just waiting. The next morning, as the sun broke through the window, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. The lines carved deep into my face told stories of all the hard work, the sadness, the years I carried on my back. But behind that tired look, I saw something else. A steely determination. I thought about Charlotte's little smirk, Brandon's eyes looking down, and I felt a spark ignite inside me. They figured quiet meant giving up. They had no clue that quiet was just the first play. At breakfast, Brandon barely even looked at me, just scrolled on his phone while Charlotte went on and on about her plans for renovating the place, about finally making this house our own. She said it so casually, so full of herself, like the walls were already hers to paint and the land hers to borrow money against. I took a sip of my coffee. I let the bitterness sit on my tongue. "And how do you plan to pay for all that?" I asked. Charlotte looked at Brandon, who shifted around in his chair. She gave me a fake sweet smile. "Oh, we'll figure it out. Brandon's already talking to the bank. We'll get it done." I put the mug down. "Interesting," I said, plain and simple. Her smile flickered just a bit. Brandon cleared his throat, mumbled something about being late for his job, and took off. Charlotte followed right after, her heels clicking like hammers on the floor. After the door closed behind them, I leaned back in my chair. The first seed of trouble had been planted. They didn't know yet that the bank was going to come back to them empty-handed. Because this house, this land, every single piece of it, was still mine. They thought I was old, useless, and a burden. But I was about to remind them that a man doesn't spend 55 years building a life just to be erased by a little quiet and a lack of respect. And just like that, the first act of my payback began, not with shouting, not with a fight, but with a quiet collecting of facts. The kind of facts that, when you finally show them, can bring a whole house of cards crashing down. The pocket watch kept ticking in my palm long after Charlotte and Brandon had left that morning. I sat by myself at the kitchen table, the silence of the empty room pressing in. The words from the night before were still there, stuck under my skin like a splinter. Moocher. I rolled the word around in my head, weighing it against all the years I'd given, the sacrifices etched into my very bones. If I was a moocher, what did that make the mortgage payments I bled to cover when Brandon got laid off in his first year of being married? What did that make the house itself? Every board, every single nail paid for with my sweat and tears. Memory can be a real pain. It never asks permission to show up. As I sat there, with the faint smell of the rose still in the air, I was pulled back to the day Brandon was born. I remember the clean hospital room, the squeak of the nurse's shoes, and then the cry, thin, but full of life. I held him before his mother did. His tiny little hand wrapped around my finger. And in that moment, I promised I would never let him go without. I worked double shifts, saved every single dime, and put my own comfort on the back burner so he could have a better life. The years went by in a blur of baseball games, school projects, and late-night talks when he was too stressed out to fall asleep. When he turned 20, I handed him the same pocket watch my father had once put in my hand. He looked at it, his eyes big with pride. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he'd said. I remember the warmth in my chest, the sure feeling that I had done right by him. That same watch was sitting in front of me now, ticking away as if it was laughing at both of us. The memory faded into the present, and I found myself standing at the front window, watching the world go by. A neighbor strolled by with their dog, waving. I forced a smile, raising a hand, but inside, I felt hollowed out. To them, we probably looked like the perfect family. A nice house, a married son, a decent daughter-in-law, a father growing old in peace. They didn't hear the stuff that was said behind closed doors. They didn't see the way my son would look away instead of looking at me. By mid-morning, I knew I couldn't just sit on my hands. I went back to my study, pulled out the folder again, and laid the papers out on the desk. The deed, the trust account statements, the bank letters. They all sang a quiet tune, reminding me of something important. My name wasn't erased just yet. I leaned back in my chair, my hands crossed over my chest, and thought about Charlotte's smile when she said, "Our home." She thought the ink on those papers meant nothing because time had made me soft, pointless. That was her big mistake. The phone buzzed on the desk. It was Brandon. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. His voice was careful, like he was walking on eggshells. "Dad," he said, "Charlotte and I were thinking, maybe you could sign something. Just a formality. It would help us with the bank." I let the silence hang there long enough for him to get all fidgety on the other end. "A formality?" I said, letting the words sink in. "And what exactly am I formalizing, Brandon?" He sighed. "Look, Dad, it's just paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We'd handle it." I closed my eyes. "And where would that leave me?" There was a pause, then he said, in a softer voice, "With us. Always with us." But the words felt flimsy, without any real weight. He knew it, and so did I. "I'll think about it," I said flatly, and hung up. My hand shook a little as I put the phone down, not from fear, but from the simple, crushing weight of what I just realized. My son, the kid who used to slip notes in my lunchbox, was asking me to sign myself right out of my own life. He didn't see it that way, but that's what it was, a clean little signature, and I would become a guest in my own home, a person who had to depend on his mercy and her tolerance. I pushed my chair back and stood up, walking around the study. My mind was a blur of feelings, anger, sadness, just plain shock. Each one came and went, leaving a sharper, clearer edge of what I had to do. I thought of my late wife, her laughter in this very house, the way she'd wipe flour off her hands when she was baking. What would she think if she saw this? If she saw the family we had built turn into nothing but cold shoulders and whispered disrespect? By noon, I knew I needed advice. Not from Brandon, not from Charlotte, but from someone who remembered me as more than a burden. I called an old number. Michael, a buddy from my army days, who was a lawyer now. His voice came through, steady as always. "Long time no see, old man," he said. "Not long enough," I grumbled, but my tone softened. "I need to ask you about property law." He listened as I laid it all out. The house, the deed, the bank talk, the insult at dinner. When I was done, there was a pause, and then a low whistle. "They've got some serious guts. They think I'll just fade away," I said. "Don't you let them," he said. "The house is legally yours. If they're trying to get a mortgage, they can't do it without your signature. You've got more power than you think." Power. The word stuck in my head. I thanked him, promised to catch up for real soon, and hung up. For the rest of the afternoon, I just went back and forth between what was and what is now. I sat in the living room, staring at the old recliner that Charlotte hated so much. I remembered drifting off in that chair with Brandon on my chest, his little breaths going up and down with mine. I remembered watching him rip open his college acceptance letter right there, tears of pride in both our eyes. Now, it was just junk, a piece of furniture they hated, just waiting to get thrown out. As the evening rolled around, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Brandon and Charlotte were home. I sat up straighter in my chair, waiting. Charlotte came in first, her high heels hitting the tile like a drum. She glanced at me. No hello, no smile. Just a purse dropped on the counter. Brandon came in after her, his tie loose, his eyes tired. He gave a small nod. "Dad?" he said. "Son!" Charlotte got busy with the mail, flipping through envelopes until she found one that made her stop. Her eyes lit up for a second before she hit it. It had a bank logo on it. She tucked it under her arm in a flash. "Dinner's in an hour," she said, sharp as a tack, and disappeared into the kitchen. Brandon hung back. He looked like he wanted to talk, but then he thought better of it. Instead, he just mumbled, "Long day," and walked away. I stayed in the recliner, listening to the clatter of pots and the muffled talk from the kitchen. Their lives were spinning, their plans moving forward, all while I sat there, invisible but in plain sight. It might have hurt once, but now it just made me more determined. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I went back to my study. I opened the window and let the cool night air come in, bringing with it the faint smell of wet dirt after a rain. I spread the papers out again, but this time it wasn't just to remind myself. This time, it was to get ready. My silence was finished. The plan wasn't all there yet, but I could see the outlines of it in my head. Documents, power, old friends, and patience, that was the one thing I had plenty of, the one weapon they'd never see coming. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and whispered into the quiet room, "Not weakness. Preparation." The words felt solid, like a promise. Upstairs, I heard them laughing, quiet and secretive, as if the house already belonged to them. I sat there in the dark, my hand on the pocket watch, and I smiled. They didn't know it yet, but time was on my side. The next morning started with the sound of hurried footsteps in the hall. I could tell by the beat that it was Charlotte. Her heels always hit the floor like a judge's gavel, every step a statement of control. I stayed in the kitchen, slowly sipping my coffee and listening. She was on the phone, her voice low but firm. "Yes, I know. We'll have his signature soon. Don't worry about it. He's old. He won't put up a fight. Just keep the numbers ready." My jaw got tight, but I didn't move. Her words drifted down the hall like smoke, toxic and sneaky, clinging to everything they touched. She didn't know I could hear. Or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, it proved what I already figured. The papers Brandon wanted me to sign weren't just some formality. They were the keys to the entire house, the land, all the equity I had built up over the years. I put my mug down gently. The spoon clinked against the porcelain. That small sound felt louder than her whole conversation. She stopped talking for a second, maybe realizing her voice had carried too far. Then the bedroom door closed, muting her voice. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet come back. It wasn't anger I felt at that moment. It was pure clarity. My silence had made them cocky. They mistook my patience for being fragile, my holding back for giving up. What they didn't give was that silence also gave me time. Time to think, time to plan, time to get ready. When Brandon finally joined me at the table, his hair wet from the shower, his tie half done, I watched him carefully. He moved slower than usual, like he had a weight on him. He poured his coffee, not looking at me. "Big day?" I asked casually. He nodded, forcing a smile. "Meetings, deadlines. You know how it is." "I do," I said. My voice was steady, but the hint of a question was still there. "I also know you've been talking to the bank." The mug froze in his hand. He blinked, completely caught off guard. "Dad, I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't bother lying to me. I'm old, but I'm not deaf. And I sure as hell am not blind." He swallowed hard and put the mug down. "It's just, Charlotte wants to renovate, start fresh. You thought what?" My voice got sharper. "That I'd sign away my life's work without a single question?" The quiet that followed was heavy. He shifted around uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "It's not like that, Dad. We want this place to feel like ours." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "This place is mine, Brandon. Every brick, every board, every dollar. It'll be yours by inheritance someday, but not now. Not like this." His shoulders drooped. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, caught in a lie, looking for a way out. But then the mask came back, the silence, the avoidance. He stood up, muttering something about being late, and left the table. I stayed there long after he was gone, staring at the empty chair. My heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but for the son I had lost. The boy who used to run across this kitchen floor with scraped knees, laughing and calling for me. That boy would have stuck up for me. That boy would have never let quietness be an excuse for cruelty. The day dragged on, heavy with my thoughts. By the afternoon, I decided that just waiting wasn't enough anymore. I walked to my study, pulled the drawer open, and laid the documents out one more time. This time, I didn't just look. I acted. I opened my laptop and started scanning the pages, putting them on my computer and making copies. Every line, every signature was saved. Insurance, proof, ammo. As the printer hummed, I thought of Michael's words. Power. I wasn't just sitting on a deed. I was sitting on a fortress. They thought they could charge in with charm, with pressure, with silence. They had no clue that the gates were locked, and I had every single key. That evening, Charlotte knocked on the study door. She'd never knocked before. That alone told me something was up. I closed the folder, pushed it to the side, and said, "Come in." She walked in with a fake smile, her voice all sweet and syrupy, but her eyes didn't match. "Dinner's ready," she said. I just looked at her, quiet. She shifted under the weight of it, her confidence shaking just a bit. "We made your favorite pot roast." "You did?" I asked. My voice was calm, impossible to read. She nodded fast, then stepped to the side as I walked past her. At the table, Brandon was already sitting down, the food steaming, the plates all set. Charlotte poured wine, her hands steady, her eyes watching. We ate mostly in silence. Every so often, she'd glance at Brandon, as if trying to get him to talk, but he didn't. He kept his eyes on his plate, his fork moving like a robot. Finally, she broke the quiet. "So, have you thought about the paperwork?" she asked, her voice light, like it was no big deal. I put my fork down with a loud clang. "I have." Her eyes got brighter. I leaned back and folded my arms. "And I'll decide when I'm good and ready. Not when you push. Not when the bank pushes. When I am ready. Her smile froze. Brendan cleared his throat, trying to calm things down. Dad, nobody's pushing. We just... I turned my gaze to him. Don't lie to me, Brandon. My words cut through, not shouted but firm. You sit quietly while she insults me in my own home. You sit quietly while plans are made behind my back. Quiet might be easy for you, but for me, it's a choice. Remember that? Charlotte's face turned red, but she didn't say anything. The rest of the meal was tense and silent. When it was over, I excused myself and went back to the study. In the peace and quiet of that room, I let out a deep breath. My heart rate went back to normal. My mind got clear. Tonight had been a test, and they had shown me exactly who they were. Brandon's silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice. Charlotte's pushiness wasn't ambition. It was pure greed. And my silence. It was the sharpening a blade they couldn't see. I turned off the desk lamp, and the room went dark. As I walked down the hall to my bedroom, I passed their closed door. I heard voices inside, low and urgent. He won't hold out forever, Charlotte whispered. Brandon's answer was quieter, almost like he'd given up. I hope you're right. I stopped, my hand resting against the wall, listening. The words stung, but they also made everything clear. My son wasn't just quiet, he was in on it. The realization burned, then cooled into pure resolve. I walked on, the floorboards creaking under my steps. In my room, I set the pocket watch on the nightstand. It ticked away, steady in the dark. I laid down, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. They thought time was running out for me. They thought my patience meant I was giving up. But what they didn't realize was that every tick of that watch brought me closer, not to defeat, but to the moment they would finally get what quietness can become when the man they wrote off finally uses it. And when that moment came, there wouldn't be any yelling, no chaos, just the truth laid out, impossible to deny. I closed my eyes, a small smile playing on my lips. The plan was starting to take shape, and they had no idea they'd already lost. The morning sun sliced through the blinds, making the room a mix of gold and shadow. I sat at the kitchen table, in the same spot I always did, with my coffee getting cold in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that was supposed to be full of life. Charlotte and Brandon had left early. Their being gone was a relief I hadn't even realized I needed. I leaned back, let the quietness wrap around me, and then the phone rang. Not my cell, but the old landline on the wall. It was so rare these days that I paused before picking it up. A familiar voice filled the line. Still kicking, old man? I couldn't help a small smile. Michael, it's been too long. Not long enough, he chuckled. Then his tone changed. Listen, I've been thinking about what you told me, about the house, the pressure. I did a little digging. My fingers tightened around the phone. And you're right. They've been asking questions. The bank is nervous. Without your signature, they've got nothing. But if they get it, you're out. And I mean completely out. The words weren't new to me, but hearing them said out loud still hit like a brick. I figured as much. I mumbled. Look, Michael went on. If you want, I can draw up some protection, a trust, maybe something they can't touch. But you need to decide. And fast. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the steady hum on the line. I'll come by, I said. Tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat in the silence, letting the idea sink in. Trust. Protection. Words that meant power, words that meant choice. Charlotte's smirk, Brandon's silence, their late-night whispers, they all echoed in my head. They thought I was powerless. They were dead wrong. Later that afternoon, I left the house. The air was cool, smelling of damp leaves. I walked down to the diner on Main Street, the one with paint peeling off the windows, and the same waitress who'd been serving coffee there for 30 years. As soon as I walked in, the bell jingled and a few heads turned. Small towns don't change much. Faces stay the same, even if the years carve deeper lines into them. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and waited. A few minutes later, Michael walked in. He looked older too, but his handshake was still firm, steady. He sat across from me, dropping a manila folder on the table. "Everything you need," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You work fast." He shrugged. "Some things need to be done quick, especially when I hear the way your daughter-in-law talks." I frowned. "You heard? Word gets around. Small towns, remember? She's been less careful than she thinks." He leaned in closer. "People talk when someone new struts around like they own the place." I sipped my coffee and let the warmth slide down my throat. "So it's not just me, then? Other people see it, too." "Oh, they see it," Michael said with a thin smile. "The trick is making sure they see you, not just the story she's trying to sell." I opened the folder and looked at the papers. Legal terms, trusts, agreements, protective clauses. Every line was another piece of armor, another wall between me and the two people who thought they could wipe me out. "Sign here," Michael said, tapping a line, "and this house becomes untouchable. They can live in it, sure, but control? Gone. It's yours until you say otherwise." I stared at the page. The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been. Signing meant more than just protection. It meant drawing a line in the sand, picking a side. I thought of Brandon, his downcast eyes, his silence that yelled louder than any insult. I thought of Charlotte, her voice sharp as broken glass. My name was on the deed. It would stay there. I signed. When I slid the papers back to Michael, I felt something shift inside me. A weight was lifted, not because the fight was over, but because I had chosen to get in the ring. Michael folded the papers neatly, putting them back in the folder. "Good," he said simply. "Now, let's see how they react when the ground under their feet isn't as solid as they thought." We went our separate ways outside the diner, the sun sinking low behind the trees. I walked home slowly, every step sure on purpose. When I got to the house, Charlotte's car was already in the driveway. I paused on the porch, looking in through the window. She was at the counter, pouring wine, her shoulders stiff. Brandon sat at the table, his head in his hands. Even from out here, I could tell something had gone wrong. I pushed the door open. The hinge creaked, and both of their heads snapped up. Charlotte pasted on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. I hung up my coat, walked past them without a word, and sat down in the recliner. The old chair groaned under my weight, the sound Charlotte hated. I let it hang in the air. Brandon cleared his throat. "Dad, we talked to the bank today." I looked at him evenly. "And they said they need more than what we have." His voice faltered. He didn't finish. "They need my signature," I said. Silence. Charlotte's jaw got tight, her hand gripping the stem of her glass so hard I thought it might snap. "Yes," she said finally. "They need you. Just a formality." I let the quiet stretch out, watching them squirm. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "A formality?" I said softly. "Is that what you told the banker? That the old man would roll over? That I'd hand you the keys to everything without a word?" Charlotte opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't." I've heard enough lies in this house to last a lifetime. Brandon shifted in his seat, his face pale. "Dad, it's not, it is." I cut him off. "You wanted my silence to mean I was giving up, but it doesn't. It means I've been watching, listening, getting ready. Charlotte scoffed, trying to get control back. Getting ready for what? I stood up slowly, on purpose, every inch of my movement full of meaning. For the day you learn that this house doesn't belong to you. Not now, not ever. Her smirk wavered for just a second. Brandon looked away, a flash of shame on his face. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just let the sound of it fill the room. When I turned back, I said, "Enjoy dinner." Then I left them sitting there, their silence thicker than any words could ever be. Upstairs, I sat at my desk, the folder Michael had given me now locked away in the drawer. Outside, the night got deeper, the stars sprinkled across the sky. From downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, urgent, angry, desperate. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. Plans fall apart when the ground beneath them moves. And tonight, I had moved it. As I closed the window, the pocket watch ticked steadily in my palm. Time was moving, yeah, but not against me. For the first time in a long time, it was moving right alongside me. The day after the papers were signed, the house was filled with a weird quiet. Charlotte moved around like a storm stuck inside a jar, slamming cupboards a little harder, letting doors shut with a snap. Every move she made said what her mouth wouldn't. Brandon, on the other hand, had gotten even quieter, like his words had been completely stolen. I watched them both from my chair. They ignored me, but they felt my presence like a shadow they couldn't shake off. By mid-morning, I decided to get out. There's a park not far from town, Thompson Park, where the benches are worn and the pond reflects the sky on clear days. I hadn't been there in over a decade, but something in me needed the fresh air, the open space. I walked slowly down the familiar paths, the crunch of gravel under my shoes a rhythm I hadn't heard in ages. I was sitting on one of those benches when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in more than 10 years. "Don't tell me you finally ditched that old recliner and take it up walking instead." I turned, and there stood Victor Henderson. We'd worked together at the factory 30 years back before it closed down. He was older, like me, his hair all white, his back not as straight as it once was, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, and they lit up when he saw me. "Victor," I said, standing up to shake his hand. "Well, I'll be damned." He laughed, a sound that brought me right back to the clang of the machines, the smell of grease and metal, the friendship of men who spent more time with each other than with their own families. We sat, and for a while, we just caught up. His kids, his grandkids, my Brandon. The quiet that followed when I mentioned my son told him more than I wanted to. Finally, Victor leaned back, his arms folded. "I've been hearing things," he said carefully, "about your house, about Charlotte." I looked out at the pond, the surface rippling in the breeze. "People talk," I said. "They do," Victor agreed. "And usually, they're right. I heard she's been telling folks you're, well, living off them. That you're dead weight." The words didn't hurt like they might have a week ago. Not anymore. Now, they just confirmed what I already knew. "She's got it wrong," I said quietly. Victor chuckled. "She doesn't know you very well then. You've been carrying people your whole life. You don't forget how to stand on your own." I gave him a small smile. "You always did know how to figure a guy out." He leaned in closer. "If you ever need a hand, you call me. I mean it. I've got friends. Old friends. People who remember who you are. Don't let them write you out of your own life." His words hit me deeper than he knew. Maybe it was the way he said, "friends who remember," because that's what I'd been missing. In that house, I'd been turned into nothing, a ghost. But out here in the open, I was still me. Still the man people knew and respected. Still the man who had built things, taken care of his family, and put up with a lot. As the afternoon sun stretched across the water, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't fight this battle all by myself. Allies matter, even old ones. Especially old ones. When I got home, Charlotte was at the counter, the phone pressed to her ear. She turned her back when I walked in, her voice dropping. I didn't care to listen. Brandon sat at the table, hunched over, his face pale. He looked up when I came in, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in his eyes. Uncertainty. "Dad," he said nervously, "were you out today?" "Yeah," I answered simply. "With who?" "An old friend." He paused, then nodded. He wanted to ask more. I could see it, but Charlotte's voice from the kitchen cut him off. "Don't bother, Brandon. He won't tell you anything useful." I looked at her, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she laughed into the phone like the whole world was hers to boss around. That night, I sat in my study again, the folder locked away, my mind racing. The meeting with Victor played over and over. His words had planted a seed, and seeds have a way of growing if you give them time. I thought about friends, about connections, about voices that could stand up to the story Charlotte was telling. She thought she was building a reputation, but a reputation can change with one good push. The next day, I made that push. I drove into town and stopped by the bank. The manager, Mr. Thompson, was an old friend. He'd been a young teller once, and I'd helped him out during a strike, making sure the workers got paid so they didn't lose everything. Now he wore a suit, his office filled with framed diplomas. When he saw me, he looked surprised. "It's been a long time," he said with a smile. "It has," I replied. "I won't take up much of your time." I sat across from him and told him just enough to get the point across. My son and his wife, they've been trying to make some arrangements, but I want to be crystal clear. Nothing moves without my green light. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "I understand." Then his eyes narrowed. "You know they've been telling people the house is pretty much theirs already." I looked him straight in the eye. "That's a story. Stories aren't facts. The facts are in my name." He leaned back, a small smile on his face. "Good to know. We'll make a note of that." As I left the bank, I felt something shift again. Not just power, but my standing in the community. Charlotte's story might spread in whispers, but whispers can be drowned out by the truth. That evening, back at the house, I found Brandon waiting in the kitchen, alone. He looked tired, worn out from being torn between keeping quiet and standing up for me. "Dad," he started, his voice soft. "I didn't know you went to the bank." I poured myself a glass of water and said nothing. He rubbed his forehead. "Charlotte's furious. She thinks you're trying to cut us out." I turned to him, my voice calm but firm. "Cut you out? No. Protect what's mine? Yes. There's a difference." He flinched at the words, the truth too heavy for him to carry. "She just wants security," he mumbled. "Security?" I repeated. "And what about mine?" He didn't have an answer. The quiet stretched out, heavy, pushing down on both of us. Then Charlotte's voice came from the hallway, sharp and demanding. "Brandon, get in here." He glanced at me one last time, his eyes full of confusion, then walked away. Later, alone in the study, I thought about that look. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if there was still a part of my son left, the boy who once promised to make me proud. But if he was still in there, he was buried deep under her shadow. I closed the drawer and heard the lock click shut. Allies. Power. Patience. The pieces were falling into place. The storm wasn't far off. I stood at the window that night, watching the lights of town in the distance. Somewhere out there, Victor was ready. Michael was ready. And soon, others would see the truth. Inside this house, they thought I was backed into a corner. Outside, they would find out I was anything but. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my hand. Each second was a reminder, time isn't their ally. It's mine. And when the time comes, they'll learn that quietness can roar louder than any insult. The first sound I heard that morning was the low hum of the printer in my study, still warm from the night before. I had spent hours scanning, copying, and putting in order every piece of paper that tied me to this house. The deed, the tax records, the trust agreements Michael had drawn up, they all sat in neat stacks, no longer in danger of getting lost or misplaced. If Charlotte thought she could build her story on convenience and lies, she would soon learn that my story was carved in ink and signatures too solid for her to bend. I carried the fresh copies to a fireproof box I'd bought years ago back when my wife was still alive. She used to tease me for being overly cautious, but now, sliding those folders inside, I heard her voice in my head. Better safe than sorry. I locked the box, put it under the bed, and for the first time in months, I could breathe a little easier. When I walked into the kitchen, Charlotte was at the stove frying bacon. The smell filled the air, rich and heavy, but it didn't cover the tension. She turned a little when she heard me, her smile fake and too quick. "Morning," she said, as if last night had never happened. "Morning," I answered, my voice flat. Brendan sat at the table, his tie loose, his eyes down. He looked like a man carrying bricks on his back, each one heavier than the last. I poured my coffee and sat down across from him. He glanced up, then quickly away. "Long night?" I asked. He nodded. "Work. Stress." The words came out choppy and empty. Charlotte slid the bacon onto a plate, her voice light. "Brandon was up late going over the finances. You know how much pressure we're under." I sipped my coffee slowly. "I know pressure," I said. "I carried it long before either of you had to." Her smile wavered for just a second before coming back. "Well, things change." "Yeah," I agreed. "They do." The conversation ended right there, but the silence was louder than words. Later that day, I drove into town. Michael met me at his office, a small building tucked between the drug store and a hardware shop. He had already put together more paperwork, trust changes, a will update, and backup plans I hadn't even thought of. He laid them out on the desk with the carefulness of a man who had spent decades dealing with other people's fights. "You're sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "More sure than I've ever been." He leaned back, looking me over. "You've always been a patient guy, but patience only matters if you use the time right. You ready to hit when the moment comes?" "I am," I said. "I've already started." We signed, sealed, and stamped papers until the folder got thicker. By the time I left, I wasn't just safe. I was loaded for bear. On the drive home, I went past the factory where Victor and I used to work. It was abandoned now. The windows were broken, the roof caving in, a reminder of how time can be cruel. But seeing it reminded me of something else. Even old ruins can hold power if you know their story. And I knew mine. That evening, back at the house, Charlotte cornered me in the hallway. She stepped close, her perfume strong, her voice low and mean. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're making things harder than they need to be." I looked down at her, my face calm. "Life is hard, Charlotte. You'll get used to it." Her eyes got narrow. "You think you can just sit there in that chair, holding on to your papers, and win? You don't know how this world works anymore." I let a small smile show on my lips. "Don't I?" She huffed, spun around, and walked away, her footsteps echoing. Brandon avoided me that night. He stayed in their bedroom, the sound of muffled arguments slipping through the walls. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the script. She demanded, He went along with it. She pushed, he gave in. And me? I just waited. The next morning, I called Victor. We met at the diner again. His handshake was as steady as it was before. His eyes were sharp. "You look different," he said. "Lighter." "I'm prepared," I told him. He grinned. "Good, because stories are spreading. People are starting to ask questions about Charlotte, about Brandon, about who actually owns what." I stirred my coffee, watching it swirl. "Let them ask," I said. "The truth will answer for me." Victor leaned closer. "And when the time comes, I'll be there. You won't be standing alone." Driving back, I thought about those words. Not alone. It had been so long since I'd felt that way. For months, maybe years, I had carried the weight of betrayal and silence, thinking nobody could see it but me. But now, friends were stepping out of the shadows. Michael with his papers, Victor with his loyalty. Even the rumors in town were starting to change. The tide was turning. At home, Charlotte met me with that same thin smile. Brandon hung back, his eyes avoiding mine. They were nervous, though they tried to hide it. I could see it in the way Charlotte tapped her nails against the counter, in the way Brandon's shoulders drooped. They knew something had changed, even if they couldn't put a name to it. That night, as I sat in my old recliner, Charlotte finally lost it. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her voice like a knife. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Walking around with your little secrets, whispering with your old buddies, taking trips to the bank like we don't notice." I looked up at her slowly. "You notice a lot, Charlotte, just not enough." Her face got red. "You can't keep this up forever. Brandon and I are the future. You're just the past clinging to walls that are gonna fall down." Brandon stepped into the room, his voice tight. "Charlotte, that's enough." It was the first time in weeks he had raised his voice at her. She turned on him, furious, but I caught his eye. For a brief second, I saw a spark. The boy I once knew was still there, buried under layers of fear and silence. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He lowered his head, mumbled something I couldn't hear, and followed her out. I sat in the quiet afterward, the clock ticking, the house settling around me. Their anger didn't bother me. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. The pressure was working. My silence was no longer their comfort. It was their fear. I got up, went back to my study, and opened the drawer. The folder was there, thick and heavy, a fortress of paper. I touched the cover gently, then closed it again. Not yet. Timing was everything, and I had time to burn. As I turned off the lamp, I heard the faint sound of rain against the window. The house was dark, but in that darkness, I felt something like peace. They thought they had me cornered. What they didn't understand was that I was the one who had been drawing the map all along. The pocket watch ticked softly in my hand, steady and sure. Every second that passed wasn't a loss, but a step closer. Soon they would learn that quietness can be the sharpest weapon of all. The first crack in their perfect world didn't come from me. It came from the outside, as most cracks do, quiet at first, then spreading until the whole wall shakes. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang in the kitchen. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but walls don't stop the truth. Charlotte answered, her voice low and urgent. "What do you mean the contractor is pulling out? They can't do that. We have a deposit coming." There was a pause. Then her tone got sharper. "Well, who told them we didn't own the property all the way? That's none of their business. We're in charge of it. It's ours." The quiet that followed was so long I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then she hissed, "Fine. We'll fix it. Just don't cancel yet." She hung up hard enough to make the picture frame on the wall rattle. A moment later, she stormed into the living room where I was sitting in the recliner, the newspaper spread out on my lap. You? She snapped. What have you been telling people? I folded the paper calmly and met her eyes. The truth. Her face got red. You poisoned the well. Now nobody wants to work with us. You think this is funny? You think you can just sit there and ruin everything? I set the paper aside, my voice steady. I don't need to ruin anything, Charlotte. Lies fall apart on their own. Brandon came in, drawn by the loud voices. He looked from her to me, his jaw tight. What happened? Charlotte spun on him. Our contractor just backed out. They said they can't risk dealing with us until the ownership's figured out. Brandon's shoulders sagged. He rubbed his temples, mumbling, God, not this again. I watched him carefully. It will be this again and again until you learn the difference between stories and facts. He glanced at me, then quickly away. Charlotte's glare could have cut glass. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. No, I agreed softly. It's only beginning. That night, I heard them arguing behind their closed door. Words like trust, signature, and leverage floated through the walls. At one point, Charlotte's voice broke into a sharp cry. He's doing this on purpose. He's sabotaging us. Brandon's reply was muffled, worn out. I didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. It was the sound of a man backed into a corner, pulled between what's right and what he's scared of. The next day, the tension got thicker. Charlotte barely looked at me. Brandon left early, came home late, the quiet between us growing heavier. But outside these walls, the whispers had started to spread. At the diner, I overheard two neighbors talking. Heard the bank shut them down, one said. Guess the old man still has all the cards. I sipped my coffee quietly, not saying a word. But inside, I felt the tide turning. Later that week, Victor stopped by. He knocked once, then let himself in the way old friends do. Charlotte's eyes narrowed when she saw him standing in the living room, but she put on her fake smile. Can I help you? No, Victor said flatly. I'm here for him. He nodded toward me. We stepped onto the porch, the evening air cool against my skin. He leaned against the railing, lowering his voice. You should know, people are starting to take sides. The word is out that Charlotte's been telling folks you're a burden, but others are saying you're the one holding this place together. I nodded slowly. The truth has a way of coming out. He gave me a small smile. Stay strong. They're starting to crack. I can see it. As he left, Charlotte stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes cold. You're getting people to go against us, she accused. I looked at her, not blinking. I don't need to get anybody to do anything. I just let people see. Her lips curled into a sneer. Enjoy your little wins. They won't last. But even she didn't sound like she believed it. The next blow came quicker than I expected. A letter arrived in the mail addressed to Brandon. I saw the logo before he snatched it from the counter. Another bank. Another no. He crushed the paper in his hand, his face pale. Charlotte ripped it away from him, looked at the words, then slammed it down. This is because of him, she yelled, pointing at me. He's pulling strings, talking to people, ruining everything. I stayed calm, sipping my coffee. I didn't ruin anything. The bank just did its job. Brandon's voice broke, anger coming out. God, Dad, why can't you just help us? Why do you have to make this harder? I put the mug down and met his eyes. Help you? I gave you this house. I gave you years. And what did I get back? Silence. Betrayal. You want more? Earn it. His face twisted, torn between shame and anger. Charlotte grabbed his arm, hissing, Don't listen to him. He's trying to mess with you. But the seed was already planted. I saw it in Brandon's eyes. Doubt. That evening, after they shut themselves in their room again, I sat alone with the pocket watch in my hand. Its steady ticking matched the rhythm of my thoughts. Each second was another reminder that patience pays off. Pressure doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, steady, relentless, like water against stone, carving deep over time. The next morning, I got a call from Michael. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of satisfaction. "They tried again," he said. "Another try to get credit." Blocked. My office flagged it. "They're running out of options." "Good," I replied. "Be careful, though," he warned. "Desperation makes people reckless." He wasn't wrong. That night, Charlotte confronted me head-on. She stood in the living room, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Cutting us off from every direction. Do you like this? Watching us struggle?" I met her fury with complete stillness. Struggle teaches you things. Nothing else can. Brandon stood behind her, his face pale. He said nothing, but his silence yelled louder than words. Charlotte took a step closer, her voice a hiss. "You won't win. I'll make sure of it." I looked at her calmly, then leaned back in my chair. "You already lost, Charlotte. You just don't know it yet." Her hand shook, her jaw clenched. She spun around, dragging Brandon with her, the slam of their door echoing down the hallway. I stayed in the quiet, the clock ticking on the wall. The first punch had landed. Their plans were coming apart, their confidence cracking, and I hadn't raised my voice once. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of my wife again. I wondered what she'd say if she saw all this. I pictured her smile, soft but firm, and her words. Patience, always patience. She would get it. She always did. The rain started to fall outside, tapping against the window like fingers drumming on glass. I listened to it, steady and sure, until sleep finally came. When morning broke, I woke up with a peace I hadn't felt in years. The tide was turning, and they knew it. Pressure was building, quiet but unstoppable. And soon the walls they had built with arrogance and lies would come crashing down. The pocket watch ticked in my hand, steady as ever. Time was mine now. And with each passing second, their silence got louder, their fear got sharper. The reckoning had begun. The first sign that the storm was about to hit came from someone I never expected. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that should have been normal. The house smelled of coffee and toast, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor. Charlotte was quiet, her anger still simmering from the arguments of the past week. Brendan sat at the table, his shoulders all hunched over, pushing eggs around on his plate without eating. I was in my usual chair, the pocket watch resting in my hand, ticking as steady as a heartbeat. That's when we heard a knock at the door. Charlotte's head snapped up, an annoyed look on her face. "Who in the world shows up this early?" she muttered, pushing her chair back from the counter. She opened the door and just froze. Standing there was her sister, Beatrice. Beatrice was younger, sharper, with the same dark hair, but her eyes were softer. I hadn't seen her in years, not since a family barbecue way back when Brandon and Charlotte first got married. She stepped inside, her voice calm, but with an edge Charlotte didn't want to hear. "Charlotte," she said, "we need to talk." Charlotte's smile was thin and fake, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice's eyes went past her, landing on me. "I wanted to see him," she said simply. The room got quiet. Charlotte's jaw got tight. "Why?" Beatrice walked closer, her eyes on mine. "Because I've been hearing things, and I don't like lies." Charlotte hissed under her breath. "Not here." "Not now." But Beatrice ignored her. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "You've been called a moocher. That you're dragging them down. but people in town are saying something different. That you're the one holding this house together." I looked at her face. There was no meanness there, no hidden agenda, just a quiet honesty you don't find much in this house. "And what do you believe?" I asked. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I believe the man who built this home isn't the type to leech off anyone. I believe my sister's been twisting the truth." Charlotte slammed her hand on the counter. "Stop it, Beatrice. You don't know what you're talking about." Beatrice turned, her tone ice cold. "I know enough. I know you've been telling people things that aren't true. I know you've been trying to push him out." Brandon shifted around, looking from one sister to the other. He opened his mouth, but Charlotte cut him off. "Brandon, don't just stand there. Tell her. Tell her how hard this has been for us. Tell her we need this house." But Brandon didn't say a word. He just stared at the floor, his silence louder than ever. Beatrice shook her head. "That's what I thought." She looked back at me. "If you ever need someone to speak the truth, you call me. I won't let her ruin your name." Charlotte's face got red, her voice shaking with rage. "You're taking his side? Over your own sister?" Beatrice stood up, her voice sharp. "I'm siding with what's right." The silence after she left was thick, choking. Charlotte stood frozen, her hands clenched. Brandon still didn't look up. I just sat there, the pocket watch ticking in my hand, a small smile playing on my lips. The tide was shifting. Someone from her own family had chosen to stand with me. That night, the house was heavy with tension. Charlotte barely spoke to Brandon, her anger coming out in slammed doors and quick, sharp footsteps. Brandon drank more than usual, nursing a glass of whiskey at the table long after she'd gone to bed. I sat across from him, the lamp casting shadows on the walls. He stared into his glass. "She thinks you're behind all of this," he mumbled. I watched him carefully. "And what do you think?" His jaw got tight. "I don't know what to think anymore." He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "I just know everything's falling apart. Things fall apart when they're built on lies," I said quietly. He flinched at the words and looked away. After a long, quiet moment, he whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice." I leaned forward. "It's never too late to make the right one." But he didn't answer. He finished his drink, stood up, and walked slowly down the hall. The days that followed felt like a weight. Rumors in town got louder. At the diner, people no longer lowered their voices when they talked about Charlotte. "She went too far," one guy said. "Trying to take what isn't hers." Another nodded. "But the old man, he's steady. He knows what he's doing." I didn't need to say a thing. The community was speaking for me now, and Charlotte felt it. Every time she walked through town, her shoulders got stiff, her smile was forced. She could feel the change, even if she wouldn't admit it. One evening, as the sun was setting, I sat on the porch, the air heavy with the smell of rain. Brandon came out quietly, a beer in his hand. He sat down next to me, staring out at the yard. For a while, we didn't say anything. Then he sighed. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "do you ever think about Mom? About what she'd say if she saw all this?" I turned the pocket watch in my hand, listening to its steady tick. "Every day." He swallowed hard. "I think about her, too. And I know she wouldn't want it like this." I looked at him, searching his face. There was hurt there, but also a flash of something else, realization, maybe even regret. "Then why do you let it be like this?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he mumbled, "Because I'm scared of losing everything." I nodded slowly. "You already are." The words hung between us, heavy and impossible to deny. He stared at the ground, his shoulders shaking a little. For the first time, I saw him break. Not with anger, not with fighting, but with sorrow. Charlotte's voice called from inside, sharp and demanding. "Brandon, get in here!" He wiped his face quickly, stood up, and walked back inside without looking at me. I stayed on the porch, listening to the crickets start their nightly song. The sky got darker, and the first drops of rain hit the railing. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool air. The cracks were getting bigger. It was only a matter of time before the whole fake show came crashing down. Later that night, I sat in my study writing in a leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years. I wrote about the insults, the betrayals, the quiet that had cut deeper than words. But I also wrote about the strength I still had, the allies who had stepped up, the truth that was slowly coming out. The pen moved steadily, each word a piece of armor, each page a shield. When I finished, I put the journal next to the folder of documents. Proof and memories side by side, facts and feelings both ready for when the time came. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows. I sat in the dark, the pocket watch ticking in my hand, and whispered into the quiet, "It won't be long now." The collapse didn't arrive with a bang, but with a slow unraveling of threads that had been pulled for too long. It started on a gray morning when the phone rang, not once, but over and over until Charlotte finally snatched it up and barked a "Hello!" I could hear the voice on the other end, loud enough to get through the receiver, a creditor, impatient and without mercy. Charlotte's voice shook, her usual sharpness replaced with panic. "No, we're fine. We'll get you the money. Just give us another week. Yes, I told you he'll sign. It's just taking time." I sat in the living room, the paper open but unread, listening to every desperate word. Brandon walked in halfway through, his tie crooked, his face pale. He froze when he heard her words, then closed his eyes, defeated. When she hung up, the quiet was terrible. "Another creditor?" I asked calmly. Charlotte spun around, her eyes blazing. "This is your fault," she spat. "If you just signed, none of this would be happening." I folded the paper, set it aside. If I had signed, all of this would have fallen apart even faster. Brandon's voice cracked when he spoke. "Charlotte, stop. He's not going to do it." She turned on him, her fury spilling out. "You always take his side. You think he cares about us? He wants us to fail." Brandon's eyes darted to mine. For once, he didn't look away. His silence wasn't him agreeing this time. It was him being completely exhausted. By noon, the first visitor arrived. A man in a dark jacket knocked on the door, a clipboard in his hand. Charlotte rushed to meet him, her voice too bright, too desperate. "There's been a mistake," she said quickly. "We're sorting it out." But the man wasn't there for excuses. He handed her a notice, sharp and final, before walking away. I saw her hand shake as she read it. Brandon took it from her, his face losing all color. "Foreclosure proceedings." Charlotte crushed the paper and turned toward me like an animal backed into a corner. "You did this," she hissed. "You destroyed us." I stood up slowly, my voice calm, on purpose. "I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to give you the weapon to destroy yourselves." She lunged toward me, but Brandon caught her arm, pulling her back. "Charlotte, enough." The look she gave him could have cut through stone. But for the first time, he didn't back down. He didn't lower his eyes. He stood between us, his chest rising and falling, torn between fury and shame. That night, the house was a mess. Charlotte yelled. Brandon begged. The walls carried every word. I stayed in my study, the pocket watch ticking on the desk beside me, its steady rhythm cutting through their noise. Time was finishing the work I had started. The next morning, Charlotte's perfect front completely broke. She stormed into my study, her hair a mess, her eyes wild. She slammed both hands on the desk. "Do you want to see us ruined? Is that what you want?" I looked at her evenly. "I want honesty. Respect. Things you've never given me." Her voice broke, a scream tearing from her throat. "You're just an old man clinging to power." I leaned forward, my voice low. "Power isn't given. It's built, and it's mine because I built it." Brandon appeared in the doorway, his face drawn. "Charlotte, stop," he said softly. "He's right." She spun around, staring at him as if he had just hit her. "You're taking his side?" Brandon's shoulders sagged. "I'm tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of pretending this house is ours when it isn't. He gave it to us to live in, not to take from. And we failed." Her hand flew, hitting his cheek. The sound echoed in the room. He didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes, the weight of years pushing down. I got up slowly, walked past both of them, and into the living room. The air felt heavy, the house itself sagging under the weight of their desperation. Outside, I could see neighbors gathered in the street, their voices low, their eyes turned toward our home. The whispers had become a public conversation. Later that afternoon, another knock came. This time, it wasn't a creditor or a messenger. It was Michael, my lawyer friend, standing tall with a folder in his hands. He stepped inside, nodded to me, then looked at Charlotte and Brandon. "It's time," he said simply. Charlotte's voice cracked. "Time for what?" Michael laid the folder on the table, opening it with careful thought. "These are the protections your father put in place. The trust, the deeds, the filings. Legally, this house is his and can't be touched. Nothing you've tried has changed that." Charlotte's face went white, her mouth open, but no sound coming out. Brandon sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I spoke then, my voice quiet but sharp. "I was silent because I was patient. I let you think you were winning, let you believe I was weak. But now you see the truth. I am not a moocher. I am the foundation you've tried to erase." Charlotte trembled, her fury turning into something like fear. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "And I have." The room went silent. Only the ticking of the clock filled the air. As Michael left, I closed the door behind him. Charlotte stood frozen, her world crumbling around her. Brandon looked at me, his eyes full of regret, of shame, of something that might once have been love. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. I nodded but said nothing. Sorry was too small a word. That night, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Charlotte locked herself in the bedroom. Brandon sat at the table long after the lights were out, staring at nothing. And I sat in my recliner, the pocket watch ticking steadily in my hand, knowing the storm had passed. The collapse was here. And it hadn't come with violence or rage. It had come with truth, patience, and the slow weight of time. When I finally closed my eyes, I thought of my wife again. Her voice in my memory, soft but steady. Patience, always patience. And I smiled, because patience had brought me here, to the moment where the lies lay in ruins and the truth stood taller than ever. The morning after Michael left the house in stunned silence, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely come up, and the light that spilled across the kitchen was pale, almost careful, as though even the day itself knew it was stepping into something final. I brewed coffee the way I always did, the sound of the machine familiar and comforting. But the house was still. Unnervingly still. Charlotte didn't come out of the bedroom until almost noon. When she did, her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, her confident mask cracked and falling apart. Brandon followed behind her, quiet, his shoulders slumped, his face unshaven. For once, they both looked exactly as they were, defeated. Charlotte even tried then to hold on to the last bits of power she thought she had. She stood at the end of the table, her voice trembling but still sharp. "We can fight this. We can take you to court. Prove you're unfit. We can still—" I cut her off with a calm wave of my hand. "Stop!" The word hung there, heavier than any shout could have been. She froze, her mouth still open, but no sound came out. Brendan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I leaned forward, my voice low on purpose. "You've spent months calling me weak, a burden, a moocher. You made up your stories to neighbors, to banks, even to yourselves. But today you've run out of stories. There's nothing left but the truth." Charlotte's lips trembled. "And what truth is that?" I rose from my chair, the pocket watch in my hand, its steady tick filling the silence. I held it up, the light catching its worn silver surface. "The truth is that time always shows people who they really are, and time has shown you, Charlotte." She swallowed hard, but her eyes had a fear in them I hadn't seen before. Brandon finally lifted his head, his voice soft. "Dad, I never meant for it to get this far." I looked at him, my chest getting tight. "You meant enough, Brandon. You meant it when you sat silently while she called me worthless in my own home. You meant it when you asked me to sign away everything I worked for. Silence is a choice, and you chose against me." His eyes got watery, his mouth opening, closing, looking for words that weren't there. Charlotte's hand grabbed his arm, as if trying to keep him from falling apart, but he pulled away weakly, unable to defend either of them. I walked to the study and came back with a single envelope. Putting it on the table, I slid it across the wood until it rested in front of Charlotte. Her eyes darted to it, suspicion all over her face. "What's this?" she demanded. I sat back down, folding my hands. "The final piece of the puzzle. Open it." She ripped it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter, formal, notarized, impossible to deny. It said in clear legal language that the house, the land, and the trust had been made legally mine, and that when I passed, the estate would not go to Brandon or Charlotte, but to a charity I had chosen, one that helps veterans and their families. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat, her face going pale. You gave it away. To strangers?" "Not strangers," I corrected softly. "To people who understand sacrifice, to people who know what loyalty means. Something this house has forgotten." Brandon's face went white. He stared at the paper, his lips trembling. "Dad, why?" I met his eyes, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of years. "Because you already made your choice. You let her voice be louder than your own. You let her convince you that I was nothing, that this house was yours to take. You forgot who I am, Brandon. And you forgot who you were raised to be." His shoulders shook, his hands gripping the table. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice breaking. But sorry, as I had learned a long time ago, is a word that only matters if it's spoken before the damage is done. Charlotte, on the other hand, exploded. She shoved the letter back toward me, her voice high and sharp. "You're just being mean. You'd rather see us ruined than help your own family. You're pathetic." I stood up, my shadow stretching across the floor, and looked her right in the eye. "No, Charlotte. I am finally free, and that is something you will never understand." Her rage faltered, turning into silence. She sank back into the chair, her eyes empty, her breathing shallow. Brandon just sat there, broken, staring at the letter as if it were a mirror, showing him a reflection he didn't recognize anymore. I picked up the pocket watch from the table and slipped it back into my vest pocket. The sound of it ticking filled the quiet once more. "You thought my silence meant I was weak," I said, my voice quiet and final. "But silence gave me time. Time to get ready, time to protect, time to take back what was mine. And now time to let go. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cool air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet dirt and distant pine trees. I turned back one last time. "This is my house. You may live here, but you will never own it. Not now. Not ever." Charlotte's eyes got wide, but she didn't say a word. Brandon's head was bowed, his lips pressed tight. For the first time, neither of them had anything left to say. I stepped outside, the porch creaking under my weight. Behind me, the door swung shut with a final click, like a verdict being read. The yard stretched out in front of me, the grass glistening with dew. Neighbors across the street paused, watching quietly, their eyes holding the truth Charlotte had tried so hard to hide. They knew now. They all knew. I walked to the edge of the porch, breathing in the morning air. The world felt lighter, clearer, as though the weight of years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. In my hand, the pocket watch ticked steadily, its rhythm no longer a reminder of patience, but of freedom. My silence had ended. My dignity had come back. And behind me, in the house they thought they owned, Charlotte and Brandon sat in the ruins of their own making. Justice had come, not with yelling, not with fighting, but with the quiet power of the truth. And as I closed my eyes, the sun warm on my face, I knew that was more than enough.